Welcome back to part 2 of how to play Warhammer 40k 9th edition. In the last video we went over the basics and some term definitions used throughout games of 40k, which prepped us to dive into the battle round. But first I want to cover command points, stratagems, and strategic reserves. While these are not part of the rules primer, I qualify these as crucial pillars of the game's design that inform the core experience of what playing a game of Warhammer 40,000 encompasses. So let's dive in. A battle-forged army, in the simplest terms, refers to constructing an army to a specified standard, based on the comprised unit's battlefield rules and which factions they are drawn from. Being battle-forged offers access to tools I would deem crucial, and I would always recommend fielding armies which are battle-forged. While this series will not cover how to build battle-forged armies, it is a point worthy of note. And in all the examples used going forward, we will assume all the forces shown are battle-forged. Command points are a tactical resource available to you if your army is battle-forged. Generally speaking, the number of command points you have available to you during a game is based on the size of the game you are playing. If, for example, we assume both armies are constructed to the strike force size, then each player would have an initial stock of 12 command points at their disposal. Stratagems are special rules that can be implemented in specified circumstances. There are many stratagems available to a player based on the publications tied to their army. This series will cover the 7 core stratagems, as doing so will provide a clear understanding of the baseline stratagem toolkit as it pertains to the core game systems. Assuming the qualifications to use the stratagem have been met, players pay the command point cost on the stratagem to use it. Stratagems cannot be used more than once during the same phase of a battle round, not including stratagems which take place outside of the battle round. Let's take a look at one of the more fundamental of the core stratagems. Command reroll costs 1 command point and allows you to reroll a hit, wound, damage, saving, advance, or charge roll, psychic test, or deny the witch attempt. It's a pretty powerful stratagem when used correctly, as it can tilt luck in your favor. Sure, rerolling 1 hit roll from a squad of intercessors doesn't feel all that impactful, but to reroll the number of shots from a Leviathan Dreadnought's Cyclonic Melta Lance can make a drastic difference in the way events unfold. As mentioned in part 1, a player can never reroll a reroll. Looking back at the Captain's Rites of Battle ability, which can grant a reroll for hit rolls of 1, if you have already leveraged that ability and the result was still undesirable, you cannot then use command reroll as you have already rerolled for that throw using Rites of Battle. Strategic reserves are another tool available to battle-forged armies, allowing you to deploy units off the board and have them arrive later in battle to outflank your foe from an opportune angle, or perhaps to respond as a counterpunch to enemy reserves. Placing units into strategic reserves is done before the battle and costs a specified amount of command points based on the combined total of the units being placed into strategic reserves. You can see how this works out based on this chart. So for this group of intercessors with a power level of 5, they would cost 1 command point. This repulsor with a power level of 15 would cost 2 command points. And if I wanted to place both into strategic reserves, their combined power level of 20 would mean it costs 3 command points. Units can arrive from strategic reserves in the reinforcement step of the movement phase, but cannot arrive in the first battle round. Setup positions for units arriving from strategic reserves depends on which battle round of the game they are arriving in. Looking at this deployment map as an example, if strategic reserves arrive in the second battle round, the unit can be set up wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge, other than the enemy's battlefield edge, but no model can be set up within the enemy's deployment zone. If arriving from the third battle round onward, strategic reserve units that arrive can be set up wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge, other than the enemy's battlefield edge. In either scenario, these units cannot be set up within 9 inches of enemy models. The only exception to this is if the arriving unit is being set up within 1 inch of their own battlefield edge, and wholly within their deployment zone. In such cases, units arriving can be set up within 9 inches of enemy models, and even into engagement range. Such units are considered to have charged for rules purposes, and is valid to attack any enemy unit within their engagement range. Which is a big deal, because as we will cover in the movement phase, one does not simply move into engagement range with enemy models. And if you have a really big model that can't fit wholly within, it must be set up so it is touching your battlefield edge. But models that do so cannot make any activations in the subsequent phases of the turn they arrive in. And lastly, units which arrive from strategic reserves cannot make any of the standard activations units do in the movement phase, and are considered to have moved their full movement characteristic. They are eligible to act as normal in the psychic, shooting, and charge phases, as well as perform any special actions. Certain units, such as the Storm Raven gunship, have the aircraft keyword, and have special interactions with strategic reserves. When an aircraft unit arrives from strategic reserves, it can be placed anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches from enemy models, facing any direction, rather than being set up wholly within a board edge. They can then proceed to follow the same rules of action validity as normal units arriving from reserves, with the exception of charging into melee combat, which aircraft cannot do. Furthermore, if an aircraft unit from your army moves off the edge of the battlefield, that is, if any part of its base or hull touch the edge of the battlefield, it is placed into strategic reserves. This also applies if it cannot make its minimum movement and is brought to the battlefield edge. Aircraft units which enter strategic reserves may arrive from your strategic reserves on your next turn. As mentioned in Part 1, games of Warhammer 40k are played in missions, which define their parameters. Missions are played in a series of battle rounds. Each battle round is comprised of 2 turns, one for each player, and each turn is made up of multiple phases in which players make activations with their units in order to secure victory in the played mission. The remainder of this series will go through how units are activated in these phases, and we will close this video out with the command phase. To start, if your army is battle-forged, you get 1 command point at the top of your command phase. Next, there may be abilities, stratagems, or other mechanics that are to be resolved in the command phase. Now is the time to do that. And that wraps up the command phase. Next, we will get into the meat of the battle round with the movement phase. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, give it a like, and if you want to help this channel grow, please subscribe. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.